The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 10th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And Jesus said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
How many of you know the story of Charlotte's Web? Yeah, it's of course, a classic children's novel and required reading in our house for obvious reasons. Kim and the kids picked it up recently to add to their list of chapter books that they read out loud. And they started it last weekend, but then I missed a bunch of it because I was away this week at our fall theological conference. So when I was listening to it when I came back, I had to fill in a lot of the blanks myself. But one of the passages that I heard them read really struck me as something that could just stand on its own, as something profoundly meaningful to us today. So, quick refresher, or if you aren't aware, Charlotte is a spider who talks, of course, that becomes a true friend to Wilbur, the pig, who also talks, like all animals do in kids' books. And so in this chapter called Wilbur's Boast, Wilbur is learning about spider webs. And Wilbur, the pig, believes that he could spin a web just as easily as Charlotte could. So Charlotte jokingly tries to teach Wilbur to do so, but it doesn't go so well. And so this is what follows. "You needn't feel too badly, Wilbur," said Charlotte. "Not many creatures can spin webs. Even men aren't as good at it as spiders, though they think they're pretty good and they'll try anything. Did you ever hear of the Queensboro Bridge?" Wilbur shook his head. "Is it a web?" "Sort of," replied Charlotte. "But do you know how long it took men to build it? 8 whole years. My goodness, I would have starved to death waiting that long. I can make a web in a single evening." "What do people catch in the Queensboro Bridge? Bugs?" asked Wilbur. "No," said Charlotte. "They don't catch anything. They just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there is something better on the other side. If they'd hang head down at the top of the thing and wait quietly, maybe something good would come along. But no. With men, it's rush, rush, rush every minute. I'm glad I'm a sedentary spider." There was that line that really caught my attention. Humans just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there is something better on the other side. I wonder if there's truth in that statement. For the most part, I would say that many who are crossing that bridge regularly are probably going to and from work. And they may not be thinking that work is the better thing they're going to, but maybe crossing the bridge to come home, that might be seeking something better. Sometimes, not always. But from the outside looking in, from the perspective of a spider who is comparing this creation of a bridge to her own web, it probably does look like we humans are just chasing after whatever the next best thing is. And sometimes maybe it feels like that actually is the case with us too. Never satisfied. Always thinking the desired thing, that next goal is still out there somewhere. That's something I hear in our gospel story today here in the 10th chapter of Mark. Jesus, his disciples, and these crowds, they're out on the road, and now they're heading to Jerusalem. Jesus has just pulled his disciples aside and told them, now for the third time, that he would soon be arrested, mocked, tortured, and killed, but then rise again. That happens in verses 32 through 34, just before today's passage. It's right after Jesus says that we pick up here with James and John approaching Jesus with this question. Teacher, they say, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. That's a pretty bold request of the Son of God, don't you think? But here's the thing. We've heard this language before. I hadn't really put it together before, but thinking back to chapter 6 of Mark's Gospel, we hear the story of the death of John the Baptist. Maybe you recall how that went. King Herod had John in prison. And as the story goes, Herod threw a big party for himself, birthday party for himself. And during the party, Herod's daughter, Herodias, came and danced for Herod. And Herod was so pleased with her that, in probably somewhat of a drunken stupor, Herod, as a thank you, says, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half my kingdom. And it's to that request that her mom tells her to ask Herod for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. So that connection, this question asked by James and John to Jesus, sounds surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, similar to this promise by King Herod. And that should get us in the mindset that this request from James and John is going to be maybe more worldly than anything to do with understanding what Jesus is actually up to. So Jesus wants to find out what they're thinking, what they want from him. And so Jesus says, okay, what is it you want me to do for you? And we heard their request. Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. And again, Jesus thinks, come on, guys. You're still not getting it. In the past 3 chapters in Mark's Gospel, Jesus has now told his disciples 3 times what will soon happen to him. Always something along the lines of how he must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And after each of those 3 declarations, we hear that his followers are still not getting it. The first time Jesus says it in chapter 8, Peter pulls Jesus aside and rebukes him, saying that can't be so. And Jesus says that famous, "Get behind me, Satan. If any want to be my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." After the next time Jesus tells the disciples about his upcoming fate, They began arguing with each other about which one of them was the greatest. And again, Jesus looks at them and says, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. There's then another instance of the disciples not understanding what it takes to follow Jesus, where he again has to say, many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. Then, as we heard today, for the third time, not understanding what Jesus was saying, after James and John request to sit at the right and left hand of Jesus, Jesus again says, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Have you noticed a theme? The disciples want greatness. Jesus offers humbleness. The disciples want victory. Jesus offers servanthood. The disciples want reward. Jesus offers sacrifice. The disciples want to be first. Jesus offers them last. It's like they just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there's something better on the other side. I think we are like those disciples who are looking for a better way, a better life, a better outcome. We should probably also note that the story that immediately follows today's passage is about that blind beggar named Bartimaeus, who hears that Jesus is passing by and he calls out to him for mercy. And Jesus heals him. And he opens his eyes to the true power that Jesus brings to this world. And that story is then followed by Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem, the Palm Sunday triumphant entry. They are truly at the 11th hour before this passion story is about to start. If we are going to continue to get tripped up by chasing what is better or what we think is better, what can today's gospel story offer us? Well, listen again to that last line from Jesus. He says, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Do you know how much influence that one little line from Jesus has had on all of Christianity? The Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. I think we know that a ransom is something of value that is exchanged in order to free something that is held captive. So, someone who has been kidnapped or has kidnapped somebody or stolen, data off a computer often demands a ransom, usually money, in exchange for getting that people or stuff back. So Christians have often heard these words of Jesus, that he has given his life as a ransom, and immediately thought about that ransom, that it was the blood that Jesus offered in his death to pay for our salvation. Maybe that's part of what he meant. But look at this passage. Nowhere in these immediate chapters in Mark's gospel is that need for human salvation mentioned, nor the captivity to the devil or being held captive by God. Instead, there is a captivity that's mentioned here. These stories that we've been hearing over the past many weeks in worship talk more about the disciples' captivity to self-centeredness, their captivity to the human understandings of power, prestige, or greatness. Particularly in these chapters of Mark's gospel, Jesus says it's the needs of others that are more important than our own riches, our own success, our own needs. One way I heard it stated is this: to give Jesus' life as a ransom for many amounts to a poetic way of saying that Jesus came to pour out his life in servanthood to humanity, even in the face of fierce opposition, both to show us the way and to liberate us into living that way. So what is this better thing that we should be searching for? I think we hear in this place that it's a humble, down-to-earth way of servanthood. It's a life of genuine greatness that seeks to serve rather than to dominate, to descend rather than ascend, and to humbly and justly and beautifully love rather than arrogantly jockeying for position. Jesus' life frees us for such a thing. Jesus' life frees us for a way of living that offers ourselves for the sake of others. Thanks be to God. Amen.